It is the fifth and final model introduced in the 2023 ZOIDS collaboration, not to be confused with the ZOIDS Wild Zero collaboration. It is ZID04, D-Saurer, with a kit of Curse Shot, Hyper Missile, Laser, Tank Legs, and the leg ability of Pupa, which reduces damage taken by about 20% or so when meeting and maintaining a certain Metaforce threshold. Now, as the biggest and baddest model introduced in the collaboration thus far, and I mean that not quite in the sense of how dangerous he can be on the field, and don't get me wrong, he most certainly can be, but also on the fact that D-Saurer is arguably also the biggest and meanest of pretty much the entirety of the ZOIDS universe, or at least of models introduced and highlighted through the use of the collaboration. D-Saurer in particular usually only being the size of D-Saurer' hand at tops, based on what a friend of mine explained, and that's most certainly no exception with how powerful and imposing this mess of a model can be. Curse Shot on the head part is a brand new skill being introduced into the game that has a rather interesting mechanic to it. But based on what I was able to pull from it in terms of its explanation, when attacking a part and breaking it on the enemy, that particular part specifically has a curse put on it through the next set of turns, where it cannot be restored through any restore or first aid means, but it also cannot be healed for a set amount of time. In addition to this, the skill also has kind of an official cooldown on itself outside of its official cooldown stat. So it means this is a skill that you cannot abuse more than once, and you have to wait for a certain number of turns to pass before you can use it again. This can be made especially handy for parts that you want to guarantee don't come back immediately, especially if the enemy team tries to make use of something like First Aid or All Restore or even Revive or Rebirth like that. Skills that bring back a lot of parts at once. This will be a really good way to guarantee that you buy yourself at least a few extra moments of time, especially if the part you're targeting is the one that you especially want broken, such as legs on a triple heavy model, or a very powerful arm or on the opposing target, and so on. Hyper Missile on the right arm is a gunpowder based skill that, contrary to other gunpowder skills like Missile or Napalm, which are AoE and scattered AoE skills respectively, Hyper Missile instead pools all of its damage into passive pierce damage, which means that compared to Missile as an AoE, Hyper Missile has a little bit of an easier time breaking parts quicker than it is peppering a foe waiting for himself or someone to come behind him and finish the job. Laser on the left arm is an optic attribute attack, however, where it gets a times 1.5 damage bonus at a 30% Metaforce charge and a times 2 damage bonus at 100% charge, which will tie in very nicely with the Pupa leg ability, where it gains a damage bonus and a damage reduction bonus, just based on how it's used as a pure set alone. Tank Legs does mean that while he most certainly will be chugging behind in the mobility department, that is kind of to be expected though with Tank Legs. And a mobility of 547 isn't terrible when it comes to Tank Legs. I believe that's generally on the higher end of where Tank Legs tend to want to sit at. But in recent updates as well over the last couple of years, Tank Legs have gotten a lot of major buffs that make them a little more worth using than they were before. One of which being that it first of all gets a passive 30% damage reduction right off the top just for the sake of it being tank-legged, which means it's already going to be rather chunky and difficult to take down just because his legs have a very high bulk. In terms of bulk, on the topic of bulk, his armor department is most certainly very nice and healthy too, as you'd expect of a tank type to be, with a head HP of about 5750, arms about 4600 each, and the legs at 4850. Very healthy HP pool between all four parts, especially if all of it is geared towards keeping the head part as healthy as possible. In terms of stats, as mentioned, a mobility of 547 isn't terrible, kind of par for the course of where Tank Legs tend to want to sit at, and an evade, of course, that is non-existent, which means all hits are guaranteed to land no matter what. Do exercise caution if you are going to use them for that reason. Damage reduction also is fully expected to be very chunky and very bulky on Tank Legs as well, and that's most certainly no exception here, with a melee resist of just shy of 1900 and a shoot resist just close to 2100, he's not only packing high HP, but also immense bulk right off the top, which means D-Saurer is most certainly not going down quickly. And that's also not including if you include Pupa on top of that, which means under all ideal situations and scenarios, not only will he be incredibly bulky and chunky, but he's also going to be packing a direct 50% damage mitigation in all ideal situations as long as he remains on the field. All that being said though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate D-Saurer a pretty solid 6.5 out of 10. Not necessarily that he's really bad or the worst of the bunch or anything, but given the fact that he is powerful but tank-legged, it does provide a number of flaws and weaknesses that you do need to be rather careful of if you are planning to use D-Saurer. Looking at his kit, essentially right from square one, he plays basically like God Emperor would. He's triple heavy with very high damage outputs on pretty much every part that there is on him, but instead of having auto charge to pump his laser power, he instead has tank legs with Pupa to focus more on staying alive longer than he is dealing a lot of damage. Because thanks to his bulk, it is going to be really difficult to take him down quickly, which means he's already got that well fine, and he'll get to his damage bonuses and modifiers with time, just for basically just taking hits or dealing damage on his and breaking parts on his own. However, another really big weakness to him, and kind of par for the course with tank legs, but not always the case, is the fact that he's also triple heavy, which means that if his legs are broken, he essentially is dropped to an absolute crawl and more or less becomes entirely harmless on the field. But with him being triple heavy, he also is immensely susceptible to any gravity punish. So press, break, break hammer, break rush are all going to be attacks that will very easily be your best ticket to knocking this dino down faster the sooner you want to take him out. As mixed parts though, I do have to rate him just a little bit higher at a 7.5 out of 10. Given that even though Curse Shot is a rather unique skill and a very interesting explanation, I'm not going to fully reserve my judgment on if it's great or not yet, because it is the first official instance of it being introduced. But Hyper Missile and Laser are both very powerful parts that you can most certainly make use of right from square one, especially with a base power of just over 1960 and almost 2100 for the Hyper Missile and the Laser respectively. And if you do find yourself on the requirement of using tank legs, his are most certainly going to be very good at keeping you alive longer. Of course, at the cost you're not going to be as fast, but the damage reduction specs that you have at your disposal will be truly invaluable when tank legs are mandatory.